Hello learners, welcome to your English class. As you know that we are doing chapter 1, George's Secret Key to the Universe. In our last lecture, we read that George took the oath and then Cosmos started explaining him the process of the birth of a star. For that, he created a window in the middle of Eric's sitting room with the help of a beam of white light. And through this window they could see the vast darkness scattered in the universe. And Cosmos started explaining him the process of the birth of a star, which comes from the giant or gigantic cloud of dust and gas. Up to now we have read in our previous lecture, so let's start today's reading. George noticed something about the view through the window onto outer space. Not all of it was covered with little stars. In the bottom corner of the window, he saw a patch of total darkness, a place where not a single star shone. When George looked outside through the window, he could see that then not all of the area was covered with little stars. Then his eyes fell towards the bottom corner of the window, and he could see there was a big patch of total darkness, and there was not even a single star shining there. What is happening there? He pointed. He put a question that what is happening there towards the bottom of the window? Why there is utter darkness or total darkness? Let's have a look, shall we? Said Eric. He pressed a button on a remote control and the view through the window seemed to zoom towards the dark patch. Using the remote control, he pointed towards the bottom of the window and zoomed that area. As they got closer and closer, George realized that an enormous cloud was hovering in that spot. When Eric zoomed that area, they saw that there was an enormous cloud, a big cloud, a gigantic cloud, which was hovering. Hovering means staying in the same position in air without moving forwards or backwards. You can call it fluttering or floating. So there was a cloud which was floating over there in that spot. The window kept moving forward until they were right inside the cloud itself, and he kept on zooming, and finally they enter into that gigantic or enormous cloud. George could see it was made up of gas and dust, just as Cosmos had said. Cosmos had just given us the description that how the star is born. The star is born out of a giant cloud of dust and gas. Now they have reached in that giant cloud of dust and gas. What is it? He asked, and where is it? George put another question. What is this? And where it is? It's a huge cloud in outer space, much bigger than the ones in the sky, replied Eric. Eric replied to George's query that it is a huge cloud which is there in the outer space, and it is much bigger than the clouds in the sky. And it is made up of tiny particles which are all floating around inside it. There are so many of these particles that the cloud is enormous, and it's so big that you could put millions and millions of earths inside it. From this cloud, many stars will be born. So Eric solved George's query that it's a big cloud, gigantic cloud in the outer space, and it is made up of tiny particles which are floating inside it, around inside it, and these clouds are so enormous and so big that millions and millions of earth could store inside it, and from this giant cloud many stars will be born. Inside the cloud, George could see the particles moving round, some joining together to form huge lumps of matter. The particles which were moving or floating freely inside the cloud, they were joining together and they started forming some huge lumps of matter. These great lumps spun round and round, and when more and more particles were joining these lumps, and when they were spinning round and round, gathering even more particles. So more and more particles were joining that lump in order to increase its size. But astonishing fact was that as the particles joined together, when you join something together, they would become bigger in size. But on the contrary, or what was the astonishing or surprising fact? The spinning lumps weren't getting bigger. Instead, they seemed to be getting smaller as though something was squeezing them. So, what was the astonishing fact, or what was the astounding fact? That those lumps were not getting bigger and bigger. Rather, they are getting smaller and smaller as something was squeezing them. It looked like someone was making gigantic dough balls in outer space. One of these giant balls was quite close to the window now. George could see it spinning round, getting smaller and smaller all the time. So that giant ball was looking like someone was someone was making gigantic dough balls in the outer space, and one of those giant balls started appearing close to the window. And now George could clearly see that when it was spinning round and round, it got smaller and smaller in size all the time. As it shrank and the size of that giant ball was getting smaller, 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 and as it shrank, it became hotter and hotter. First, it was decreasing in size, and second one, the intensity of heat was increasing. It was getting hotter and hotter, so hot that George could feel the heat from where he sat on the sofa, and he even could see that intense heat while sitting on the sofa. And then it started to glow with a dim but frightening light. And what thing happens next? That giant pole started glowing with a dim but frightening light. Why is it glowing? Asked George. Now George put another question, that why this lump or why this giant bowl started glowing. The more it shrinks, said Eric, the hotter it gets. The hotter it gets, the brighter it shines. Very soon, it is going to get too hot. So Eric solves his query that the more the giant bowl shrinks, the hotter it gets, and the hotter it gets, the brighter it shines. And very soon, the giant bowl is going to decrease its size. It would be getting smaller and smaller, and it would be getting hotter and hotter, and then start shining brighter. Finally, whatever the Eric told to George, it happened. The bowl exploded from the inside, throwing off its outer layers of burning hot gases in all the directions. The outer layer of the bowl was bursted or exploded, and then it threw all the hot gases in all the directions. After the explosion, the bowl was shining like the sun. Wow, said George. Is that the sun? It could be. And when he saw that shining, burning piece of giant bowl, George said that, is that the sun? It could be. Eric replied, that's how stars are born, and the sun is also a star. When a huge amount of gas and dust combines and shrinks to become dense and hot, as you have just seen, the particles in the middle of the bowl are so pressed together that they start to fuse or join up, releasing an enormous amount of energy. So when those particles which are moving, floating freely inside the cloud, when they started joining together, they formed the, what you can say, huge lump or the big lump. When they joined the more particles together, on the contrary, instead of becoming bigger in size, they started getting smaller in size, and it appears that someone is just shrinking them, and as the giant bowl size decrease, it produces tremendous heat, and when it is unable to hold that heat, it explodes and scatters all the hot gases in all the directions, and finally it starts shining like a bright star. So this is the whole process how a star is born. And when it produces an enormous amount of energy, this is known as nuclear fusion reaction. It is so powerful that when it starts, it throws off the outer layers of the bowl and the rest is transformed into a star. The outer layers of bone are exploded and the inside of it transformed into a new star or into a star. That's what you just saw. The stars are now shining steadily in the distance. It was a beautiful sight. George gazed at it, amazed by its power. When the star was shining steadily in the distance, it was such a beautiful and incredible sight. George gazed at it, amazed by its power. Every now and then he could see huge jets of brightly shining gases sent hundreds of thousands of miles from the surface at extraordinary speed. So he was amazed to see that amazing sight or incredible sight or astonishing sight. Every now and then he could see the huge jets of brightly shining. He has seen the birth of a star, and in the same manner, many stars took birth at that time. Thousands of miles from the surface at the extraordinary speed, and the star will keep on shining like this forever, he asked. Another question crooked up in George's mind, that would this star keep on shining like this forever? He asked a question to Eric, whether this star will keep on shining like this forever. Nothing is forever, George, said Eric. Eric replied him that nothing on this planet or in this universe is meant to be forever. Adapted from George's Secret to the Universe by Lucy and Stephen Hawking. Let's read about Stephen Hawking. Stephen William Hawking, his lifespan is from 1942 to 2018. He was an English theoretical physicist, cosmologist, author, director of research at the Center of Theoretical Cosmology within the University of Cambridge. He is known for his contribution to the field of cosmology, general relativity, and quantum gravity, especially in the context of black holes. His most famous book is called A Brief History of Time. He is such a great scientist. Okay, and he is a physicist, cosmologist, an author too, and the director of research at the Center for Theoretical Cosmology within the University of Cambridge. Hawking had a rare early onset slow progressing form of motor neuron disease, also known as ALS. So he was not a healthy being. Since his childhood he was suffering from a motor neuron disease which is known as ALS that gradually paralyzed him over the decades, and a major part of his body was paralyzed for decades, for years and years. Even after the loss of his speech, he was not able to speak. He was still able to communicate through a speech generating device, initially through use of a handheld switch. His body was got paralyzed. Okay, he was unable to speak. He was suffering from a disease, a motor neuron disease known as ALS. Despite these physical disabilities, he was such a great scientist. And though he could not speak, still he could communicate through a speech generating device which he used to operate with the help of a handheld switch, and eventually by using a single cheek muscle. Using his single cheek muscle, he used to operate that machine. So such a great scientist he is. Read a lot about Stephen William Hawking, and definitely you would inspire a lot. Lucy Hawking, 1970, she was born in 1970, is the best known as the children's novelist and science educator. She is the daughter of theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking and writer Zane Weld Hawking. As a young adult, she played a significant role in tending to her father's deteriorating health caused by ALS. Her father is her true inspiration, and she is following the footprints of her father and working successfully as a children novelist and a science educator. So this was all about chapter 1, George's Secret Key to the Universe. I hope you would have understood it. If you have still any doubt or any query, you can ask me either during the Zoom classes or you can leave a text in the WhatsApp. read the chapter and complete the assignment in your fair notebook. Bye. Have a great day.